Let's go.
All right, welcome to another episode of the FNC Roundtable. We have been doing them monthly, but we decided to step it up a notch and add it in another one every month as well. So the lucky listeners, all 35 of you, you get two episodes a month now. What we're going to do this one, rather than having one topic that we're just going to ramble on about for an hour, we're going to introduce a topic each. Something that we're interested in or we have thought about, and we want to just chat about it with other fellas in the chat. So I'm gonna let Mac go first on this one. He's fresh off Bathurst 1000 and Summer Nats. But he's been on this one for a while. He's wanted to talk about it for a little while. So Matt, I'll let you introduce the topic and then we'll get into it.
All right, g'day, folks. Thanks for listening. So I can't guarantee that we will cover multiple topics today. It might just be we cover the one because rambling is a thing. Anyhow, so the topic that I wanted to talk about was this idea of just eat whatever you want. This idea of if you have an urge to eat something, just have it, just have it. And I've seen this sort of pop up a lot on social media of late, and I'm not entirely sure if it's tied to the anti-diet movement, although it is in many ways. I'm not sure if there's a direct tie. But the idea behind it is like, yeah, like I said, if you have an urge, if you want to have something, just eat it. Like, don't think, just almost impulse eat. And I'm not also necessarily sure this is, the intention of the creators who make content that support this. But, um, you know, yeah, this idea of not really, and it's good to remove food rules. It's good to give yourself unconditional permission to indulge. But my issue with it is that there are folks who are viewing this content and this information advice and saying, well, I don't look like you. Um, I don't look like you, and it's easy for you to just, have hot chips by the pool and a cocktail, but I can't do that. And the other thing is people sitting there being like, well, I have fat loss goals. I'm currently in a body that might be not so physically healthy, and I want to lose weight, or I want to lose weight because I want to be a healthier version of myself, or whatever it might be. And they're viewing these reels and they're almost conflicted. They're like, this person's saying, just eat whatever, just have it. But then they're thinking, well, I don't look like you, and I have health seeking or weight loss style goals in mind. And this approach to nutrition directly conflicts with those goals.
Yeah, I feel like it could have issues, even if someone doesn't have a body change goal, like a fat loss goal, the impulse eating could still have some significant impacts on how they feel, but also like themselves as a person and like their goals. But also if we look at habits, like impulse eating or even like being an impulsive person in general is a habit that is formed by neural pathways. And what we want to try and help people do is have a bit more of a delayed gratification where they actually think about their actions before they follow through with them. And I think the pendulum, like I think we've spoken before about the pendulum swinging too far in one way. Like it's gone from the whole like over restriction, and they've just gone, no, you've got to go to the complete other end of the spectrum, and it's just swung too far.
Yeah, because it's like I do think that messaging almost exists with the assumption that you've previously forbidden foods. I often reflect on how there aren't necessarily like good or bad like cues or messages so much as it's about like the right one sitting in the right context. And I think if you take an individual who's like a 10 out of 10 in terms of like so-called orthorexic behaviors, like they're obsessed with like healthy food, they think there's a bunch of bad and forbidden foods, telling them, hey, let yourself be a little bit more impulsive and forgiving with yourself as to what you eat is like a fundamentally good thing. But if someone comes to you going, oh, I am restricting to some degree is sort of congruent with my values and my goals here, partnering that message with, hey, just eat whenever you feel like it, and eat that in that impulsive sense probably isn't quite as productive.
Yeah, so I think it's good that this message of rejecting food rules and foods being good or bad, and also, saying yes to foods that might be considered indulgent or, might be not really within your eating routine or your eating plan, I think this is a good thing. I think the root intention of it probably is a good thing, but then it gets taken too far, like Josh said, that the pendulum swings too far the other way. And what I want to do now is kind of identify or compare and contrast it with intuitive eating. So, I personally haven't looked up the definition from research of what impulsive eating is. And I don't know if there is one. I haven't looked. But in my mind, it's just like what we described before. You have an urge, you just act upon it. There's no thought around what's going to make me feel good. There's no thought around what's conducive to my long-term goals, what aligns with my values. It's just like, hey, I'm at a beach club here in Bali. I want to have cocktails and chips. I'm just going to order it. And it's good to give yourself unconditional permission to indulge. Okay, but the difference between when I say unconditional permission to enjoy yourself, or when I think intuitive eating, it comes with an element of considering how am I going to feel? What's going to make me feel good? Because intuitive eating is about rewarding your body and appreciating it and guiding your food decisions in accordance with that. But there's that element of conscious food decision making around what's going to feel good, what am I going to enjoy, does this align with my sort of values, what I want from food? And impulsive eating, which is what has been this, like I said, big trend thing on social media, it just doesn't have that. And I feel like this is the issue with it.
Yeah, well, I guess you could even establish like impulsive eating as like the opposite of mindful eating, right? Because I think often some people strawman that whole intuitive eating idea as like, just eat whatever you want, do whatever you want, as opposed to being like a bit more of a contemplative, what does my body need right now? What does this hunger cue actually say? And therefore, how should I behave right now? Like, it's like there's this assumption coming from diet culture that intuitive eating means you're full all the time and you're eating whatever you want all the time. When in reality, it's much more reasonable and more of a middle ground and a lot more considered than that.
Yeah, I think there is that the people that don't understand intuitive eating, they think, why would I eat intuitively because I got to the way I am based on my intuition? Like, no, that's probably more likely impulsive eating, to be honest. And I think the impulsion, it would be like, I think I said before, like there's no gap between the stimulus and response, the cue and the craving, and then the following through with the behavior. Right, you have this impulsion, you see a cinnamon scroll at the cafe and you go, fuck, I want that, and you have it the first time you have it, right? If you add that up over the course of your, like a month or a year or even your life, if you have a lot of impulsive behaviors, even if they aren't just in relation to nutrition, that could have a pretty negative consequence. If you act on every impulse you have, right, and you are an impulsive person, how far are you realistically going to get in your life? And especially if you are trying to pursue a certain goal and live in line with your values. And the reason it becomes so tricky is because of our environment. There are so many cues in our environment which would lead to these behaviors that, eating indulgences, like looking at your phone when you're driving, all that kind of stuff. Like there are so many cues in our environment. If you acted on every single cue, and because you were impulsive, you wouldn't get anywhere.
Well, it reminds me quite nicely of like Plato's allegory of the ring, right? And I'm going to nerd out here.
Hey, what?
Yeah, so in Plato's Republic, one of the allegories he plays around with is this idea that if an individual ultimately has no rules, they're not actually free because they become a slave to their own desires. And I think you could say the same thing, right? With food, even and I think a lot of our messaging at FNC is anti-food rules, anti-unnecessary restriction. And in many ways, that's reactionary to where the industry is. But the reality is there is probably a fundamental level of not restriction or like hard rules, but there's probably a fundamental level of like control or constraint we need to put around our food to actually be able to engage with it meaningfully and in a goal pursuing way.
You're 100% right, Tom. And look, at the end of the day, if someone wants to achieve the goal of weight loss or improving the healthfulness of their diet, there's just simply no way around setting parameters. I'm not going to say restriction, but placing parameters on your diet. And, going and having the cinnamon scroll at the cafe, like you mentioned, Josh, on an impulse without really thinking it, that is a parameter that doesn't align with these parameters that will lead you in the direction of your goal. And I think, people from coming from or proponents of diet culture in the modern day, whether that be aggressive macro tracking, always building or cutting or just all that sort of space, their push back to intuitive eating is that, like you said, Josh, this is why everyone is overweight. This is, it's not going to help people improve their health. People are just going to eat and eat and eat. And you often hear people say things like, if I don't track my macros, I'll just continuously eat until I can't walk. And in a lot of instances where people have been reliant on external cues, so numbers and data like tracking rather than their intuition and their hunger and fullness cues, this might be the case. But the big contrast between intuitive eating and, mindful eating, which is a part of intuitive eating, or even how I or Shannon would say unconditional permission to eat for enjoyment, is there is that conscious food decision making. And I think, like I said, this push for impulsive eating in quotations, because like I said, I haven't actually looked at the definition of it. I think this is really pushing against that. And another big issue with it is it's creating comparisons. And we know that comparisons can be extremely detrimental for people who, might be comparing upwards, especially. And, someone who is in a body that is a larger body and they want to change that, or like I said, they want to improve not improve, but change their physical appearance, which there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. They might see someone who, in their view, looks better than them, who is, has a superior physique to them, and they are doing this impulsive eating thing. They're saying, I'll just have the cinnamon scroll. And then they're comparing themselves to that person, being like, well, I can't do that, therefore I'm inferior, and kind of talking themselves down. And this can also impact things like self-efficacy, because it's like, I have to work so much harder than everyone else to achieve a physique that's not even remotely near as quote unquote good as them. And like I said, this can impact self-efficacy, and people might not be as willing or as motivated to continue. They might be feeling quite down and just generally not in a good place about themselves overall. And I think, that highlights a big problem with this trend right now from what I can see.
Yeah, and it makes our job a little bit harder as like we're coaches that try and help people eat in a health-seeking manner, and that does include physical health, so eating protein and plants. So if one of our clients is trying really hard, but they're not making progress at the rate that they would like, and they are following the protein and plants guidelines, they're being mindful with their indulgences, they're not being super impulsive, but they see the influencer in Bali having the cocktails and the chips whenever they want, they're like, fuck, well, why can she look like that and eat chips? And then I'm trying really hard and somewhat controlling my calorie content, and I still don't look like that. Like that makes them think it's really unfair, right? I think like just going back to what you were saying before, Mac, as well. You said the word I think you said consciousness, right? So impulsiveness, right? You don't consider the consequences of your actions. And I think this is what's really important for, I guess, anyone when it comes to what they're about to do. Consider the trade-offs, right? Consider the positives for doing a certain thing, but also what are the consequences of doing this certain thing as well. So they're like, oh, cool, yeah, food freedom, that's great. But what is the consequence of having chips whenever you want to eat them and having a cocktail every single day of the week? What are the potential consequences, not on just on your rig, on your body, but also how you feel mentally, physically, what happens to your sleep, all that kind of stuff. They don't actually think about what's going to happen tomorrow, in a month's time, in a year's time. There are consequences to our actions when we actually have to weigh those up and do that decisional balance, the pros and the cons, and which one is helping me progress towards the person that I actually want to be.
I think on the note of consequences too, it's important we caveat this conversation by saying that unless you get food poisoning, it's very unlikely that a single meal will actually have meaningful consequences. But the problem is when we think that way, it means we probably behave less well on average in terms of aligning with our goals and progressing. So there's this really delicate balance of it doesn't actually matter realistically if you have the cinnamon scroll today, to use that example. But what does matter is does that become the average of your behaviors? So some impulsivity, if you can put it in a box and constrain it, I don't think is necessarily problematic if that help some fundamental need that you might have. But the problem is when that becomes the default course of action, or even the course of action we're doing more often than not.
Yeah. So the pros of this trend, no foods are off the table. You can indulge. You shouldn't set food rules. It's okay to eat the things in the moment that you want, even if it might be out of your routine, and even if it might be misaligned with your health seeking or nutrition type goals at the time, or your long-term values. But the issue with it is, I'm going to say not just the interpretation, but I even think the message of the people who are creating this, because like Tom said, they're coming from a place of probably having a lot of food rules in the past. And, I think this message speaks to those people. But like I said, you can't necessarily control exactly who's viewing your content on social media. And yeah, you're going to have people there who are, the consequence of this is that they're going to be thinking it's okay to go to the cafe and just have that cinnamon scroll. Like that's going to become an okay thing. We're normalizing that. And, normalizing a lot of these things is a good thing. Like I said, normalizing indulging. But I'm not sure I'm on board with normalizing impulsive eating all the time, especially when someone wants to actually achieve a nutrition goal that requires that you just can't get around this, that requires some parameters. Now, we can try and make the diet as flexible as it needs to be, or as flexible as possible, and only as hard and as restrictive as it needs to be. We can be very conscious of what parameters we place upon our diet, selecting only those that bring a worthwhile return on the degree of restriction, the effort, cost, all that. But at the end of the day, if you want to lose fat, you want to lose body weight, there has to be a caloric deficit on average over time. And things like cinnamon scrolls every day at the cafe, high calorie, highly palatable, not very satiating or filling, appetite satisfying. It's just not conducive to that. So there's a problem there.
Yeah, and like the fundamental part of that, right, is that things are unfair. What the three of us might have to do to obtain and maintain a certain physique is going to be wildly different just between the three of us, let alone throughout the entire population. There was an Instagram post I saw the other day where someone suggested that having a good rig is a status symbol, which I think is deeply problematic in a number of ways. But I do think part of the problem with that discussion is people who are predisposed to gain muscle easily remain relatively lean. Maybe they have like a high degree of appetite reduction when they eat enough food. People in that boat are going to have a much easier time eating more impulsively, having those indulgences. But the people who have traditionally struggled probably the most with their weight are going to be people for whom that kind of tactic and that kind of way of living is probably going to be the hardest to do in line with their results. And like that, I think that's an unpopular discussion point. Like we want to live in this egalitarian world where everyone can get ripped. And I do think everyone can get ripped, but I think a better question is like, should everyone get ripped? Because there are people for whom the cost that will have on their life just is so much greater than any potential net benefit of like being able to see some like striations on their quads or whatever.
I think one of the reasons I like these chats so much is that we all have a different perspective and different way of looking at it, and like almost like Matt kind of comes at it from a bit of a body composition perspective. Tom, a bit more of a philosophical perspective. But I like to look at like the habit approach and like even like the effect that it has on mood as well. If we look at habits, right, there's the loop of a cue, routine, reward. It's the reward that locks that habit loop in. So if we look at impulsive eating, right, you see the cinnamon scroll, you have it when you want it straight away. Right, the cue is seeing it, the routine is eating it straight away. The reward is that delicious cinnamon scroll, right? That locks it in. That means next time you see it, right, you want it again and you have it again and it just keeps going and going and going. So it forms that pathway, right? So it means that eventually the habit is going to be a lot harder to break. So if you're promoting impulsive eating for someone, eat whenever you want to, like that could have a significant, again, negative impact. It's going to be very, very hard to break that habit. So it's like, so when is the end date? When does this impulsive eating challenge stop? and how do you help them move away from it eventually? That's one thing. The second thing I wanted to mention is that like what you eat does affect your mood, right? Like, so obviously too much restraint is negative, but like eating protein and plants and exercising, like especially eating like fruits and veggies, right, can improve your mental well-being, right? It can improve your mood. It can reduce your risk of things like depression. Like, not to say that it solves everything, but there is research that suggests that kind of stuff. So if you swap that for just the indulgences, that could be an issue. But also, if someone goes, I'm in a shit mood, I'm just going to drink a bottle of wine, that is impulsive again. That's a maladaptive coping strategy, right? And that has negative impacts, not only on their physical health, but also their emotional health as well. Like their psychological well-being is suffering as a result of someone saying, eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Oh, cool, I've had a shit day, I'm just going to order a pizza. Like, is that helpful? I don't think it is.
Yeah, and I think part of that discussion too is deciding to do that impulsively in the context of you've probably historically restricted and fetishized a few foods and sort of done that set of behaviors. Because like part of what the research says on like intermittent or like partial reinforcement, like to go back to that behavior loop idea you raised, Josh, is if we reward ourselves only infrequently, the salience of that award, the effect it has becomes far, far larger. So like what we get is these people who are needlessly restricting and then going, oh, I've been good, I'm going to reward myself. And then they start eating impulsively. And because like the treat is food, the amount that food is rewarding is so much more, which is also making resisting that behavior harder in the future. Whereas alternatively, I think there's like a lot of good sense to go, okay, if you are dieting, don't necessarily reward yourself with food, because it's actually making saying no to food or potentially constraining your diet more down the line even harder.
One point that I want to add to this as well, guys, is, and I'm just going to say it like it is, say it, how I'm seeing it. So a lot of the folks who post this stuff, like we've discussed already, they come from a path of rigid food rules and restraint. And the pendulum swings the other way, where there's potentially overeating going on. But this is a means of justifying those actions to a social media audience. And then off the back of that, trying to sell, I'm a binge eating coach. Sign up for my really expensive coaching. And really deep down, those individuals probably still have a lot of issues. And what's going on is that's being brushed under the carpet. So that's one of the issues that I have with it. And that's what I have to say for today.
To that too, I think people actually, you know what, I'm not going to name and shame, but I'm going to damningly critique. If you're someone who has had a history of disordered eating or like disordered eating behaviors, and a thing has gotten better for you, and a thing has made that better, that's not the answer for everyone. And that's why like actual qualifications frameworks matter, right? Because if you see someone who is properly qualified, who is like a psychologist who specializes in disordered eating behavior, they actually have the full toolkit. But if you're just insert name who competed once or twice in bikini, found it made you really unhealthy, and now you've quote unquote learned to love yourself because you've moved to the Gold Coast and you sit in the sun every morning while you ground yourself, you have a very narrow set of ability to help people, and you're just helping people by telling them to be like you. And if they're not like you, it not only is it not useful, but it's actively discouraging for people, and you're probably doing more harm than good. Like you're not actually being a good person by trying to help these people. You're being self-centered, and you're doing it for reasons associated with like your own ego. Because if you did care that much, you'd put in the years and the work to be able to help people to the actual best of your ability.
That was awesome, Tom. Well played. That's
why I think the first Substack I wrote was on like, do you care enough to learn? And if you are a coach, do you learn enough about this job and your clients to learn how to become a better coach? And I think like another way to look at what Tom was saying is that we need to coach the person, not the problem. So we can't just go, okay, this person wants fat loss. Here is a solution, or this person over restricts. Here's a solution: food freedom, right? Like, let's actually go like, what's the root cause of this problem? Like, get to know this person a little bit more, and then find a solution. Well, sorry, let's create a solution with that person that is tailored to that person, not just like, hey, if you over restrict, the answer is eat whatever you want, impulsive eating. Oh, fat loss, the answer is macros. Like, that's not the way it is. Like, we need to coach the person, not the problem. And to do that, we actually need to understand the person and not treat them like we treat ourselves.
I do think that's one of the harder things to come to terms with when you're early in the industry, is that not everyone is you. I think I went through like a good maybe 2 years when I was like a first personal trainer, where I took the framework with which I saw the world and I applied it to everyone. And it took me doing that and going, hang on, like, why isn't this actually helping that many people? To somehow figure out like, oh, hang on, not everyone is like you. But that's also a pretty uncomfortable realization, right? Because it means you've got to admit that you don't know, and that you do have to approach people differently instead of just regurgitating, whatever spiel of the week is.
Yeah, but then so the opposite of like that narrow-minded coaching approach would be that empathetic approach, and a big part of it is actually being like creative in your understanding. You're trying to like really like unpack and consider like why this person is doing a certain thing or feeling a certain way or not following through with a certain action. Like, you have to then really just try and think about it. And for some people, they just don't want to do that. And that's what frustrates me, is that I keep saying that coaching is a person job. Like, you need to like working with people if you want to become a coach. It's not just about, I like nutrition, I like training. Like, no, you have to like people and you have to want to get to know people. It's not just about training and nutrition. Like, if that's the case, fucking try and be an athlete, right? Don't be a coach instead.
And what other career would you say, like, do this because you like it? Like, there's not many people, like, I know a lot of people who love watching rugby league or love watching soccer, and almost none of them are like, man, I should really make coaching my profession. But for some reason, with like the gym and nutrition, we have this schema that if you like it and if you're relatively good at it, it should become like a capital generating pursuit for you. Like, I could even argue, hey, if you really like it that much, do it for free for a bit. Spend 6 months making this your hobby, and then decide, is this juice worth the squeeze? Not, is this a cash grab, which is like peripheral to a thing I maybe enjoy.
I think for some coaches, it's a way, it allows them to live the lifestyle they want, train whenever they want, fucking work whenever they want. It's easy for them. And that's what really pisses me off. Like, it's a job where you're changing, like, you have the power to enhance someone's life, like change it for the better. Like, don't just try and fit those in around your fucking training sessions. Like, that's what really pisses me off. Like, think about why you're doing this job. And if it's just to like supplement your lifestyle, then fucking get a new job.
It's because I want to train at 10:30 a.m. every single day, and I want a matte black AMG C63, and I want a property portfolio on the Gold Coast.
How do I get this, Mac? Is there an ebook you could sell me?
Well, actually, if you sign up to my container for $90,000, I will teach you my ways, and you too can be a 7-figure business boss babe, just like me.
We're going to move through space, and we're going to collapse time.
We're going to collapse that time. We're going to make these bold moves, and we're all going to make it.
And heal our inner child. For like, that's a bonus side package.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's extra.
That's it. Yeah, it's 120 grand a year.
Yeah.
Guys, anything else to add on this impulsive eating, delayed gratification, Mac?
Not on that topic specifically, but kind of in relation to what it turned into about coaching the individual. Like, not everyone wants to work on their body image or needs to really work on their body image. Not everyone needs to work on being more free in their food decisions. Not everyone needs to track their macros. Not everyone needs to. Some people want to track their macros. Some people want to compete in physique sports. All that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think this is a good segue into that anti-goals thing, because I think and look, it's good that people niche. Like, I'm not going to work with someone who's going to compete in a bodybuilding prep. I'm probably going to refer them to someone else. So it's good that people have their niche areas, but I think even within a niche population, there's always going to be differences in values, barriers, goals, desires, preferences, like all of the above, right? So even if you are, say, for example, a bodybuilding coach or a body image specialist, you still need to let go of, this is what's worked for me, this is my approach. Everyone who I coach has this same exact goal down to the T. And I think, the push of don't have a goal in nutrition, don't lose weight, don't change your body. I think that contradicts the idea of people being an individual and the whole client-centered coach approach.
Yeah, I agree. Like, even if you have a niche and all your clients have the same goal, right? The things that are holding them back are unique. And that's what we need to like, we need to be able to pivot our coaching approach and adapt our coaching approach to the client, where they're at, what they need, what's holding them back, tailor all that stuff, even if the end goal is basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, because if you say to someone, we don't do goals, then you're not moving them towards the life that they want to live. Because ultimately, coaching with nutrition should be about using food and diet manipulations or interventions to, using this tool to help someone move in the direction of the life that aligns with their values, that makes them happy. And even like you said, Josh, if your clients all have the same goal, they all want to compete in a bodybuilding prep, their barriers, their limitations, there's all going to be different considerations there. So this is why the toolkit approach is beneficial, rather than, as Tom mentioned, this is what got me out of this hole, this is what worked for me, so I'm just going to apply my thing that works for me to everyone. So, the funny one that I see, and this is something that I honestly used to say back in the day, is macro tracking fixed my relationship with food. This is something that I used to semi-believe, but deep down I was a bit skeptical of it anyway. And now I'm just like, yeah, that was total bull. But this whole idea of people giving macro tracking or meal plans to try and fix some degree or form or variant of disordered eating.
You know what grinds my gears is when people say they offer personalized coaching, but all their clients are on macros. Like, that's not personalized coaching. Like, personalized coaching personalizes the approach. Like, they don't just give personalized macros.
And I think like on the macro tracking fixed my relationship with food thing, I think there's also, like, should we consider that as a thing which can be fixed or a thing that can be progressed? Because I think you could definitely use macro tracking as a means to improve one's relationship with food, if the nature of the tracking means you move from like a rigid to a flexible dietary concept. Alternatively, you could use macro tracking to make people's relationship with food worse by making it more rigid. And something I guess I reflect on a little bit is, like, when I first started tracking my macros, it massively improved my perception of like navigating life as a person who ate. Like, I felt like it made me a lot more flexible. I felt like it added all these things. And then after sort of like 3 or 4 years of doing that relatively consistently, I actually found it began to do the opposite. And I guess like the bottom line of that is, if you're an individual who has a tendency to develop relatively or somewhat disordered eating patterns, they're probably going to manifest, at least to some degree, regardless of what you do, unless you're actually doing the work on like what the deeper problem is. And I think that's definitely a thing you should work through in therapy and with psychology, as opposed to hoping there's a novel food intervention, which will make you realize that you're a good person, or that you are worthy, or that you have control over your external world.
Well, Tom, I manifested collapsing time today. Anyhow, what I was saying is every tool in the nutrition toolkit can bring benefit. And every goal, every mindset or approach can bring benefit. Like, for example, like you said, macro tracking, leading you in the direction of rejecting the idea of foods being good or bad, or say even that that impulsive eating thing that we discussed at the top of the episode, helping people, be a little bit less dichotomous and moving them in a direction of giving themselves permission to eat for quote unquote enjoyment. But when these concepts and these goals or these strategies get taken too far, that's when we start to see diminishing returns. And what once brought us some value starts to actually have an opposing effect, as you discussed. Like the reliance on external numbers and data to control food intake is something that can develop after a prolonged period of tracking. Taking the impulsive eating too far, all of a sudden we're having the cinnamon scroll every single day, and we're normalizing the idea of just eating just eating it, not even thinking. I'm not even going to say just eating how you feel, because that's not what it is. It's just like just eating what you impulsively want. And yeah, that's good initially, but then all of a sudden, yeah, that's normalized every single day. And someone who wants to achieve be a healthier version of themselves is in a state of, well, this is counterintuitive or counterproductive rather.
Yeah. I think just to kind of bring it back to that impulsive eating thing as well, if we look at like that's a habit loop again, the cue isn't just how you feel. The cue could be your environment. So what you see, it could be a time of day, could be an emotion, could be a person you're with or people you're with, or it could be a preceding event. Like there are 5 things that could be triggers that could spark you to then want to eat something. So it's not just this whole like being in tune with what you want. Like there are pretty much 4 other factors that could be making you think that you want a cinnamon scroll, or to eat some ice cream, or to have some hot chips. Like it's not just like that's why it's not intuitive, because it could be based on external factors, and that's where it becomes a very, very tricky thing.
Yeah, and I guess that's like the whole interrogated behavior thing again, right? It's really worth examining why we do these things, like, because that then tells us like, okay, like, is this actually the thing which is going to solve this problem? But it also means that we're able to enjoy it more meaningfully when we do it, which I guess is the flip side. This isn't an anti cinnamon scroll podcast, but instead, like, make the cinnamon scroll as good as possible. Because I'd argue if you do that to soothe a big emotion or out of like a degree of impulsivity, you're probably not actually gonna like it as much.
Yeah,
whereas if you make the time to sit, whereas like if you make the time to like sit down in a nice location and just enjoy it for what it is, you're going to get a lot more happiness out of that, funnily enough.
Yeah, like let's say for example, you go to the cafe and like so you see the cinnamon scroll first day, like, oh fuck, I wouldn't mind that, but I'm in a bit of a rush. I've got to go to work now, and eat it really fast. Whereas if you go, oh, Thursday, I've got a bit of a slower morning. If I really want it, I'm going to go to the cafe and I'm going to sit down and have the cinnamon scroll with my partner, and I'm going to make it the highlight of my day. Like that's 2 completely different situations, and one's an enhancer, and one's like, will it even like we even know you've had it? But that's still delayed gratification, by the way. So delayed gratification isn't no gratification at all. It's just delaying it. Like it could be like by 20 minutes. It could be by a day. It could be by a week.
Yeah. That's what I do think. I do think like setting a timer can be useful for a lot of people. Like if you want to do a thing, like you want to go back for seconds, you want to have the cake or whatever, like just setting a 5-10 minute timer on your phone and then asking yourself at the end of that time, is this the thing I still want? Can be super, super useful just because it makes you pause and interrogate it. But I think the trap potentially with this set of thought is that there are people who will take it to such a degree that it becomes like a fixation, and we sort of become obsessed with seeking perfection in our ability to do those things. Whereas once again, like that middle ground is where the money is.
Yeah, I see what you're describing there, Tommy, is like a form of urge surfing, except you've set a timer, whereas I would think of urge surfing as just distracting yourself with a different activity or task or thing like, I might go play with the dogs or I might clean the kitchen or something if I was thinking about an urge surf that I could apply right now. But yeah, like what I said before, it's a useful strategy. It can create that time gap for you then to revisit that urge in a more level-headed headspace and be able to ask yourself, well, why, like, what is the root reason why I'm experiencing this urge? What are the cons? What are the benefits? And weighing up that decisional balance. If that is over-applied, we start to see that consequence where we're just constantly preoccupied with food decision making. And this is obviously, preoccupation with food. That can lead to some negative downstream effects. And then we also see the potential impact on available time and mental resources for other areas of life. And, like Shannon can say, we want to let other areas of life flourish.
I think flourish is
And
a
this might
stretch.
impact that.
Maybe be adequate. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can work with that. I guess something I'd throw back at you there, Mac.
Throw it, mate. Come on, have a crack. Let's go. Line it up.
Like, actually, that's really embarrassing. I've completely blanked because I got excited about letting the rest of my life
Throwing
flourish.
something. Yeah.
I
was going to say, like, there is power in just pausing before you make a decision. If we say, let's use the cinnamon scroll, for example, I see it, I think I want it, I pause, I think about it, and if I still have it, like, that could still be a win because you have actually thought about it and like you've built the habit of having the gap between the stimulus and the response. And that can go a long way to forming new habits. So if someone is an impulsive eater right now and they want to break that habit, they could start by pausing first. Even if they follow through with the action, that's okay. The win is the pause. And then later in time, you might notice that the pause leads to a better decision for your long-term goals as well. So like there is a bit more to it in that sense that like eating something doesn't make you a bad person. Like, but if you want to break that habit, you just need to have a bit of awareness first as to why it's there, and then put some steps into place or put some processes into place and to try and change the behavior.
And no one's saying that is an easy thing to do, by the
No.
way.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it's like any behavior change, right? Like we need to like acknowledge that we have a set of tendencies or behaviors we fall into. But the trick isn't acknowledging that without actively like internalizing it as a part of who we are. Because like to dovetail back to that idea you had earlier of I couldn't stop tracking macros because like tracking macros helps me control this food environment. People observe that is the way they control it. They acknowledge, hey, this is problematic. But in doing so, they've made it like an integral part of who I am, and stepping away from that becomes way harder. So we want to strive for understanding of self, but then acknowledge there is a second step, which is in using that knowledge to try and change or at least shift the dial on those behaviors a little bit.
Yeah. So awareness and then action.
Yeah. Because like awareness without action is like not really that useful, right? We could actually end up putting ourselves in a deeper hole to begin with.
I think that's a good segue into the whole, if you're not going to action, don't measure it.
Yeah, Tom, do you want to bring this one up?
Yeah, well, something I've thought about a lot recently is how coaches, and like I'm super guilty of this because I love data. We'll try and collect data and sort of learn things and obtain information, but then it actually doesn't really quantifiably impact how we change our approach. I think like the classic example of this is if you look at like you might sign up with a bodybuilding coach for the sake of an example, and on their weekly check-in and spreadsheet, they've got things like what's your resting heart rate, what's the quality of your sleep out of 10, what's your mood out of 10, what's your energy out of 10. They might have all these metrics, but then at the end of the day, all they're doing like with their coaching product is responding on how close you were to hitting your macros. Because every extra metric we get people to track is like extra cognitive load, right? And it's tempting to dress that up as a value add, but in reality, if it's not going to help us make decisions, like why do we care? Or why are we forcing that onto other people?
Yeah, I actually think it's lazy coaching, and it's coach-centered coaching, because it's like the check-in system that like my clients all get the same thing, and I can't be bothered changing it. And if they have to put more effort into, say, completing the check-in or measuring all these metrics like their resting heart rate and stuff, then that's not my problem. And also, it gives the illusion of providing more value, because it's like the client has to then go and do all these things. Oh yeah, I've got to make sure I measure my heart rate. And in some instances, that they might be like, this is comprehensive, this is, you know, top level coaching, but it's not personalized because it's kind of got a lot of fluff in it that isn't really like relevant or in alignment with the person's goals, or worth that effort cost. And sometimes there can actually be risks involved in some of these things. So, you know, just to use body weight scales as a classic one, like, you know, people, that's a frequent metric used in nutrition coaching, and rightly so. Like, it's fantastic, right, when it's used appropriately. But when it's just applied to every single person, you know, there's going to be a couple of people in, say, that cohort who have a really bad reaction to the scales, and all of a sudden their whole day and how happy they are in that day and how productive they are is built upon what the number on the scales is when they wake up in the morning, take a shit, and then stand on those scales. And I see that as potentially problematic. The other thing that I want to raise here is the idea of, well, you know, even if we're talking about variables that we're actually going to act upon, the idea that if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think that that's not entirely true. People say, well, if you're not measuring your calories and you're not tracking them, then how are you going to manage them? And they'll often use a bank account analogy. And I hate this, because saving money and spending money is not influenced by internal physiology. I mean, it's all based on up here and thoughts and logic. And yes, that influences food decisions as well. And yes, in the modern world, you know, our physiology, or our cues in that respect, our internal cues are, you know, they're compromised, or their capacity to do their job, they're up against more barriers, if you will. But nonetheless, in order to manage a particular diet variable, you don't always need to measure it. And yeah, so this is talking about things that we've actually said, we're going to use this metric, or we want to manipulate this thing. Even in those situations, you don't always need to freaking measure it.
And I guess, and Josh is going to correct me on this because I've got it wrong probably. Is it Godwin's law?
Good hearts law.
Good hearts law. Yeah. That when
a measure becomes an outcome,
goal,
it ceases to be a good measure.
Yeah. And I guess like even to a degree, like calories, I think we throw a calorie target. We, capital we, the industry, throws a calorie target at people sometimes. Like the calorie target is the goal, whereas in reality, I would view it as more of a cue to incite a set of behaviors. And sometimes it's easier just to tell people what behaviors we should try and chip at. Like, it's lower cognitive load.
Yeah, it's like I try and say to a lot of coaches, like calories is only one part of it. It's actually what they do with like the calories that matters, and that's where the behaviors come in, the eating behaviors. If we go back to like the check-in questions as well, as a coach, we want to try and make the check-in as effortless as possible, right? So getting rid of all the extra fluff. If a client goes to check in, there's 30 questions in there, what's the likelihood that they're going to do it? Especially when you force them to check in on a certain day. Like, that does my head in the first place, right? But then the other thing, like, let's scale it back to the only the things that you need to know in order to give them feedback to help them progress, right? But it's also, I think the power of a check-in is that it encourages the client to reflect, right? It's not just for feedback, it's for them to actually reflect, and then us to get insight. If we even then look at like what they're measuring, only measure what is going to help them make progress and what they need advice on. So if a client is only working on adding protein at breakfast, or even eating breakfast, do they need to track all their calories? Do they need to even log all their meals in a food journal? I would argue they don't, because their goal for that week, their success criteria is having protein at breakfast. So why would you then give them feedback on their dinners if they're just focusing on the protein?
I think for a lot of people that can be kind of hard to grasp with conceptually, right? Because they're paying a fair chunk of money, like for a lot of people, like a lot of money to get coaching, and the idea that you wouldn't go a quote 110% can be a little bit weird or like foreign. Because like often I will have to talk clients down from the level of intensity they're proposing to engage with this thing. Like, to use the case of if you're someone who wants to improve your breakfast, I may have to tell someone, hey, stop tracking your dinner. You know, stop trying to weigh social meals in your head while you're eating them. Like, forget that. All I want is this like 7 out of 10 where you're showing your breakfast every day, you know, or you might log your daily steps, say, but I'm not looking for like a detailed rundown of what amount of training you're doing, or however you want to put it. It's sometimes you need to talk people down from committing to that level of complexity because you know it's going to keep them in the game for longer and just be less of a pain.
Yeah, it can be super overwhelming trying to make all it, like if someone has to change like 5+ things with their diet and lifestyle, trying to change all at once when you have like, this is the thing, like clients don't exist in a vacuum. I think that's what a lot of other coaches need to realize. Just because they have a goal, let's say it is to improve their body composition, it doesn't mean that they fucking take 3 months off work and they say to their families, all right, you guys live somewhere else and I just want to change my body. They don't live in a vacuum. Like they have other shit going on. Like they have work, family, study, hobbies, friends. Like nutrition and training might make up like 10, 15% of their life, right? And the mental resources they can allocate to that kind of stuff, right? So as coaches, we need to think about that and don't overwhelm them with too many things. And if they don't follow through with those things, like be empathetic. Understand, like, yeah, you've got a lot going on in your life. Like ask them, what can you do? Like, what are you ready, willing, and able to do? Like, focus on like competency. Like, such a big part of coaching is like competency and autonomy.
To throw onto the lions here, what do you guys think about where like compassion and like hard love or pushing people, where do you feel like those two like intersect? Because that's something that tends to keep me up at night too, right? It's sometimes you do need to put your foot down and challenge people to sort of do better or to push for more.
I think it's where
and
like
sometimes we need to be respectful of what's going on.
Yeah, like I think reflections are helpful, like helping them identify their inconsistencies and the incongruence with their goals and their actions. I don't think telling them, like this is what I wrote about this the other day, and I think I'm going to do a story about it on it today as well. That like I see other coaches say that they advertise that they call clients out on their shit. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, how does that actually help someone? Especially when we look at the research on empathy and how that actually helps to improve a client's experience, but also their outcomes in regards to behavior change. And what does it come down to? Unconditional positive regard. Like not calling clients out. And then how do you do that? How do you call clients out on their shit? I don't get it.
Josh has been reading parenting books again.
Yeah, but Josh, the research, logic, all of these things, they're great. But Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
What did it? Yeah, that's all I say.
You know what I think kills me about like the nutrition and training industry is that they're so like coaches. Hold on. Coaches claim to be evidence-based, right? They claim to look into the research and be up to date with training and nutrition, right? But they don't do any research into people skills, into communication, into actual coaching. Like that is how we help people change. Like most people know about diet and nutrition. Most people have an idea of the things they shouldn't and shouldn't be doing, but they're not doing it for some reason. They don't need a coach to call them out on their shit or tell them what to do. They need a coach who's going to listen and understand them, all right? And then ask the right questions, all right, to then be able to guide them in the right direction and actually empower them to take action and move towards the person they actually want to become. Like, that's what does my head in. Like, again, coaching is a people job. So learn about people, improve your social skills. Like, don't focus only on nutrition and training.
Well, and like, at the risk of upsetting a large part of the industry, are you actually evidence-based, or do you just follow Greg Knuckles? Like, no, but it takes so much time to be good and competent at reading literature. Like, it's like I spent a year for my honors year like researching this like incredibly small niche, and after 11, 12 months of that, I felt so dumb, and I felt like so incapable of actually expressing like the nuances of that field well to other people. And I think for a lot of people, they've become attached to this idea of being evidence-based, like it gives them authority, and it also helps them quiet a little bit of, oh, like, what if what I'm doing isn't right? You know, what if my clients doubt me? They can just be like, oh, it's science, you know, rah, rah, rah. When like, you're not actually evidence-based. You just copy people on Instagram, and when Poliquin died and stopped being cool, you just picked a new god. Like, there's nothing admirable about that.
Yeah, I think like if you say you're evidence based, but you do this tough love thing, like you're not really evidence based, you're trend based. And right now the trend is to be a little bit like evident, and I say a little bit evidence based because it doesn't extend beyond, you know, tracking macros, and applying that approach and tracking all these variables. You know, oh, we need to track our macros because that's evidence based. We need to control calories and correct, obviously, and that's the most direct method of doing it. But I think this is when we want to bring in the concept of evidence informed, where you take the evidence, you consider the individual, you apply a bit of, you know, expertise as a practitioner, and then you mash them all together. And you might know indeed that, yes, you know, the evidence suggests that X, Y, Z, but apply a little bit of thought to the person and the situation and even their preferences and what they want to do, which is actually a component of evidence informed practice, like the definition of it. Then, you know, the actual strategy or the guidance might look a lot different to what the evidence is directly suggesting.
Well, I think then a huge component of client-centered coaching, I would say, is the golden behavior criteria. So yes, taking that evidence, because that is one part of it. It's the stuff, okay, it works, right? But you need to think, is it worth it? But can that person do it? And do they want to do it? Like, that is what the golden behavior criteria is. Like, so take the evidence, but suggest it to the client, right? And ask them, like, can you do this? And do you want to do it? If not, then find a different approach that still is evidence-based.
Well, and I think part of that too is what's actually like evidence-based or evidence-supported is for nutrition and training, it's unbelievably broad to the point of I'd almost argue nihilism. Like there are so many approaches and so many ways to roam. If an individual backs up their approach by being like, oh, it's what the evidence says, it's ultimately meaningless because like the evidence can support so many different things. Like, man, I can find evidence for like walking for muscle gain. So like big whoop, you know, like fantastic, you're evidence-based. When you know, like in reality, it's just like the evidence is also in front of you. The evidence is the person you're working with and the data they've given you as to what you can do to make their lives better.
Yeah, Tom, there's many roads that lead to Rome, but my road will get you there the quickest.
Yeah, that's great. You're not open to the Roman Empire though, right?
Lads, what do we think? Keep going, or we wrap it up there? It's been an hour.
I reckon we wrap it. I think we're just going to start rambling.
Yeah.
More esoteric, please.
Yeah.
More philosophy, Thomas.
Yes, let's bring it.
PT. Oh, that's it. PT Tom. Tom PT. Philosophy Tom.
Yeah, it doesn't mean personal trainer. It means philosophy.
Yeah. All right. as always, good to chat, lads. Hopefully we open some minds to different ways of doing things. You know, I think a lot of coaches listen to this and hopefully they get some value out of it. And if you want to follow us on Instagram, Mackenzie Baker _ Tom Clark Icarus, sometimes
It is that this week.
Yeah, this week it's that. I'm
There'll be a new one.
Hero Nutrition Mentoring. We're all at Fortitude Nutrition Coaching. If you want to sign up as a nutrition coaching client, you can do that through the Fortitude Nutrition Coaching website. If you want to sign up for coaching mentoring, you can do that through Hero Nutrition Mentoring. But as always, it's a pleasure, lads, to chat about this kind of stuff.
And if you want to sign up for my $90,000 Boss Business Babe coaching container where you can collapse time, then just shoot me a DM.
Matt,
Likewise.
whereabouts are you in the pyramid scheme of these Boss Business Babes?
About 2/3 of the way up. So there's a few Boss Business Babes who are 7-figure coaches. Yeah. I'm kind of 6, but like multi-6. So yeah, pushing towards that 7-figure range. So we'll be there soon. But yeah, all the peasants below me can continue to pay me to collapse time, essentially.
Awesome, thank you. Cool. I'm not quite there yet, so I might have to sign up for coaching with you.
Do you want to sign up for mentoring?
Yeah,
I'm currently offering a cheaper price for the next 3 hours. Then it'll be a normal price.
Do you have a mastermind coming up?
Yeah. This is the mastermind. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Thanks, lads. Have a good day. See you in a couple of weeks.
Catch you, gents.
Enjoy.